I have a number of shirts that my dog's hair doesn't stick to, but this isn't one of them. This shirt, because of its texture, holds whatever hair brushes onto my body when I'm cuddling with my dog. And the question is, in the area of shame, what makes shame sticky? Because there's two types of shame. One is the shame of doing something inappropriate, something wrong, something that harms others. And that shame, we feel it as we get close to or as we do something, like we might, in a fit of temper, hit our child, and then we might feel ashamed, like, that's not really the ideal way of doing things. I'm sorry that I did it. I'm sorry I don't have a better way of managing my anger. I feel ashamed for what I did. And in that type of shame, we can address by saying, I'm sorry. Maybe we can talk about it. Or it just, an hour later, we're not hitting our child. And so the shame lifts because it's a guide. Like, you can look at the cult or culture as a path through chaos of all the different things we could eat, of all the different things we could say, of all the different languages we could speak, of all the different ways that we could see the world. This is our path, right? And the path emerges out of the past. Hopefully it was useful at some point in the culture's history, but this is our way. And as we diverge from our way, shame guards the territory of divergence. If we get too far separate from the cult around us, then shame comes up. Shame says, you're diverging from the normal path. You're separating from the others. And this is designed to bring us back onto the path. And the reason for doing that is not that the others know the way. They may or may not. Some of them may be fools. Some of the ways may be outdated. But rather because of the network effect. And what the network effect dictates is, first of all, superabundance. If you're part of a large network, and you can think of, for example, the network of the US dollar. If you have US dollars, you're plugged into the network of the US dollar. And if you have a US dollar, you can take it anywhere around the world, and you can take it to a bank, and the bank wants that US dollar, and they will convert it into some form of value. If you take it to many places, not a bank in the world, they want that US dollar, right? So it's a big network, and so it's a valuable network. Now, if you take a Pakistani unit of currency, and you take that to many people around the world, it's not as big of a network. It's not as desirable. Central banks around the world are not trying to accumulate that currency. It's not a reserve currency. So it's less valuable. But if you create a new currency, it's not hard, right? You come up with a nice design, right? You create your own currency. It's all paper at this point, or digits. And so you create your own currency, the will currency. And it's a terrific currency. The paper is better than the paper printed, the US dollar is printed. The paper is better. The design is much better. You hire a good artist and the design is terrific. The number is high. You write 1,580,000. It's a high number, right? Everyone should want this bill. It's good paper, it's nice, but it's a network of one. Meaning, you know how valuable it is, but the only way that anyone's going to get anything is to give that bill back to you. So if you give that bill to someone, the only thing they want to know is, well, if I give it back to you, what are you going to give me in exchange? Because nobody else is going to give me anything. I mean, maybe they'll buy it for $5 as a souvenir of a network of one. But it's just not going to go anywhere. So when you have a small network, it reduces its value, right? So an individual is a network of one. And an individual identity, a unique pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, is a network of one. And it's difficult to get things done. It's if you have, as I say, one, a brand new currency that only one person will exchange anything for in the world, you can't shop that currency around. Nobody wants to go find me and see what I'll give them that they want in order for that currency. They want something like the US dollar because they can take that to a whole number of people, and a lot of the world is priced. You can price it in US dollars so they can see the value, right? In other words, the US dollar, which is uglier than my currency, which doesn't have as good paper as my currency, which is only a $100 bill rather than a $1.5 million current, bill, or a 1.5 million will, it's just not as valuable because the network is very small. Another example, you design a new USB interface that nobody else has, and it is the best USB interface. Oh, it's smaller, it's better in every way. It's just there's nowhere to plug it in, right? So I want to sell you my mouse with my new USB port, right? But there's nowhere to put it. So nobody wants the mouse. And this is what shame is designed to highlight. You may or may not have a better way of doing things, but it's different. And if it's different, you're leaving the network. It's just supposed to be a little guardrail that's going to say, are you really ready to do this on your own, right? Because if you start believing Jesus is the Son of God, you've got a big network. But if you start believing that Bill is the Son of God, and you just had a vision, right? You had a vision, Bill is the Son of God, right? It's no different than Jesus had a vision, whatever. But there's a very big network connected to the name Jesus. And they all seem to generally believe, that this and that. There's common themes. They all diverge in various areas. But each of those divergences are costly, right? If you're a Protestant or a Catholic, if you're a Mormon or this, whatever, those are costly divergences, right? Because you're part of different networks, and the smaller the network, the less support you get, right? Because, and the same is true with the university. Oh, you went to my university. Well, here, you get preferential treatment. So people give preferential treatment to their cults, to their cult members. It's always been that way to one degree or another, right? The healthier cults don't punish and totally shame the other networks. as worthless and deserving of slavery and all that. But some of that, right? If you're of a certain race, you're part of that network, right? So if you're German around, if you're a German non-Jew around the time of Hitler, you're part of a network that doesn't get sent to a concentration. But if you've got some Jewish blood, right, you're a different network, right? So in shaming racist, judgmental, totalitarian type networks, then your network gets treated very well. The other networks not treated well at all. Like if you're a network in a country that's going to war with another country, well, anyone that belongs to your network, you fight and protect with your life. But anyone part of the other network, you kill them, right? So it's a very big deal what network you belong to, number one. But number two, how big is your network relative to other networks? And it's a secondary consideration, how intelligent is your network, right? A network of one that's the best in the world can be more difficult, more problematic, right? You've got a mouse that plugs into only one computer in the entire world. It's the best mouse in the world, by the way. Points just this and that and the other. But it only connects to one prototype. It makes it completely worthless if the prototype is lost, if there's low battery on the prototype, and now you have to use another, it's not going to work, right? So shame of doing is basically saying you're diverging from the appropriate path. You're diverging from the way it's done. And so you may not want to leave the network, because if you get too far out there, you eat a different food, you talk a different language, you see things in a different way, you wake up in the evening, they wake up in the morning, you're going to lose cohesion and you're going to lose support from your network. Your network isn't going to be there to catch when you throw it, and they're not going to throw things that you're able to catch, right? So you're fragmenting, you're differentiating. And there is a moment of shame around that as a reality check to say, can you do it? Yes, your language is better. Your new sleep routine is better, for you at least. It's a great idea. It's wonderful technology. You've figured it all out. You've got a better way of doing things. But can you do it independently and efficiently enough to offset the fact that you're part of a very, very tiny network? So that's the shame of doing. That's the shame of doing. And it's supposed to guide you back to the conventional, to the normal, to the majority point of view, where it's safe, not because it's correct. The majority is always wrong if you look closely. They're never on the cutting edge. The majority is a fool relative to the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of intelligence. Majority is always wrong. It's always lagging behind. It's usually out of sync with reality. It's 100 years in the past. We're still doing this law because 100 years ago this was doing things. But everyone's doing it, right? So it's safe in its numbers, but it's mediocre in its excellence. But numbers sometimes matter. Now so this is the shame of doing, and that's to guide you back. Now, what about the shame of being? The shame of being, first of all, shame always has a message, right? So there's a feeling, there's a physiology, but it also always has a message. It can be the shame of doing, I'm doing the wrong thing, I'm doing a disgusting thing, I'm doing a bad thing, I deserve to be punished, whatever. There's a message that's connected to that feeling. And the same is true with the shame of being. Now, the shame of being I'm a mistake. I didn't make a mistake. I am a mistake. I am a failure. I didn't fail. I am a failure. And the shame of being is identification. So we each have an I. That's the ego. And the ego identifies with a series of thoughts, feelings, actions, words, and ways of being, right? So I identifies with a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. I am this pattern of thinking. I am this pattern of feeling. I am this pattern of doing. I am this pattern, etc. So I identifies, holds on to, says this is me, self-defines with a pattern. And so shame of being is when shame enters the identity, when the I defines itself as the shame. Now we have shame of being. So the question is, and that's when it sticks, right? This shirt, because the hair is sticking, is defining, right? So I can now say that, I am covered in hair. I am covered in hair, right? A bit of hair came and went, hair fell by. It's when it moves to I am, right? Now, let's go back to the shirt for a moment because, we all know that this is unkempt, right? What is this? Unprofessional, perhaps. What is it? Slovenly, careless. What is this? What is this in the story, right? So the cult, defines a story. He's got hair all over his shirt. Does he know? Is that embarrassing? Is that this? But you're not supposed to do it, right? That's the bottom line. You're not supposed to make a video with a dirty shirt, with a hairy shirt. You're just not supposed to do it. Why? Why? Well, it's not done. Why? It isn't. That's all that matters in a cult dynamic is it isn't done. But it also matters what is the story. So that person is a fool, right? So that's the narrative of shame. So the shame, first of all, you deviate from the norm. Secondly, there is a story about it. People who care about themselves present themselves well. People who care about themselves present themselves well. People who present themselves well are better than people who don't present themselves well, right? Why? Well, that's just what the story we made up. Because we could make up a story that person is really efficient and not superficial. We could do that. That's just not what our cult does, right? We could say that that's a mark of distinction, right? That's a mark of distinction because he's focusing on ideas. He's focusing on ideas that matter. These are substantive ideas. And we're a substantive cult. We're not. But if we were a substantive cult, we could say that these are substantive ideas. And they show real character, right? He's not worried about hair on his shirt. He's thinking important ideas, right? And he's going deeply into them. He's lost in the ideas. That's the ideal. Now, that's appropriate. You guys fussing with your clothes and all that, pay attention to that guy. He's focusing on ideas. Now, that's a mark of distinction, right? So in a cult of philosophy, rather than a cult of appearance, that would be the case, right? But we're in a cult of appearance, right? Does that look good? Does that look good? Is that so? And who's at the top of the cult? Well, the trendsetters. What are the trendsetters saying? Well, the this and that. So in other words, we've elevated trendsetters in appearance to be deities within the cult. Now, is this what the world needs? Is this, the best way of doing things? It doesn't matter. The majority is always wrong from a scientific point of view, right? Because they're always lagging behind. They always have lagged behind. They always will lag behind. But they are a cult, and they are a large network. The majority is a large network, right? And so when you diverge from the majority, there's the ringing bell of shame. Can you deal with this? Can you exit this network and survive? You can think of cults as being space stations. Can you leave the space station? Now you're out in empty space. And can you find another space station where you are more suited? That's the question. That's the question. And shame is telling you you're leaving the group. You're leaving the group. Can you survive alone outside the network? So we know that, so it has a story. That's bad. That's less desirable. We don't hang around with those type of people, right? So we're also, of course, which is more shameful? Talking about the faults of the majority? Well, that's not normal. The majority is supposed to want to be normal. That's not normal. That's weird. i.e., it's not normal. That's all weird means. Oh, I don't want to be weird. I want to be normal, right? Well, normal conforms to the majority. The majority is the average. The average is the medium. The medium is mediocre. The majority is not excellent, and it's not terrible. It's average, right? So if you're average, you're part of the majority, right? And you're not excellent, nor are you terrible. You're average, right? But that's a safe place to be, right? That's a safe place to be. So shame is fundamentally dealing with our relationship with others. And in that sense, it's different than conscience, right? It's different than conscience. You can feel shame standing up for a child if you're the only one standing up for the child and the whole crowd is booing you, right? The whole crowd is racist. You're standing up for a child of a race in a racist cult. And you are being shamed, booed, thrown food at, right? Stop getting in the way. We want to violate this child. Right? We want to stone them to death. And maybe the rocks come at you because you're protecting the child. You're not part of us. You're part of the enemy. You're protecting the enemy rather than your own cult. Now, your cult is sociopathic, ignorant, simple-minded, cruel, stupid, has nothing better to do than stone a child, right? Hundreds of you? Like you could be building a house for the homeless? No. We're part of a fucked up sociopathic cult that likes killing people who are different than us. And you're not one of us. You're the part of the problem, right? You're standing in our way. Let's kill them too, right? You get to decide, are you going to be one of us, right? Or are you going to die with this kid, right? It's a tough choice to make. Are you going to be one of your cult members? Or are you going to die with that kid surrounded by a sociopathic mob, right? Where do you take your stand? Well, what's the right thing to do? What's the normal thing to do? Well, the normal thing is to join the crowd. What's the right thing to do? Well, if you want to survive, you join your crowd. If you want to do aspire to your ideals of a world without racism, you take a stand for that kid, right? It's not, so which is better? Which is better? Well, it depends, right? Do you want your ideals to survive? Or do you want your body to survive? Like, what are you serving? Are you serving an eternal ideal? Are you serving, right? Are you serving my body goes through another day in a fucked up cult of hellish abuse, right? Is there a right or a wrong? Can somebody tell me? Well, the majority will always tell you, and they'll always be wrong. Whatever they say, the majority is always wrong. There's always a better way of doing things because the majority always lags behind excellence. Excellence always goes in front of the majority. Now, how does this shame of being comes across? Because the really damaging shame is the shame where I am a mistake. People aren't loving me because I have wearing the short. They're pointing at me. They're laughing at me. I am bad. I am unlovable. I'm a joke. I'm not valuable. I'm not important. So these are messages that our ego, our I, makes up, or that people shout. You're bad. You're wrong. Go back to your country. We don't want people of your skin. We don't want this. The majority will say a story that helps it feel comfortable with its norms, right? Right? A group ego just wants to maintain its identity. Like, we're this color skin, we're this language, we think this, and we're not like those people. Get away, right? A group just wants to maintain its majority identity and have it be clear. Why? Well, the I likes to know what it is. Like, the I is very frightened of the unknown. And the best way to answer confusion and frighten of the unknown is to have a simple repeating pattern. We are this way. Why? Well, that doesn't matter about that. We're this way, and shut the fuck up about it, right? We're this way. We're this way. We think these things, we do these things, we eat these things, and you're not that. Get out of here. You're messing with our identity, our nice, simple thing, right? We're supposed to shake hands. Shut the fuck up and shake hands. That's the way we do that. Well, why don't we rub shoulders? I want to rub his shoulder. No, get out of here. Why haven't you taught your child to be appropriate? Well, what's wrong with rubbing shoulders? It's not how things are done. It's just not. Cut it out. And you're not supposed to you're supposed to apologize and get your child to shake my hand. Shake your hand. Where do we come up with this bullshit? Extend it. Affirm. Where do we come up with this bullshit? It doesn't matter. It's a network. It's a network, right? And so shame is deviation from or dissociation from or rejection from the network. We come to our mom, they turn away. I don't want to see you. Meaning who you are doesn't fit into our family network, right? I thought you were a strapping young man, but now you're gay? I don't want to see you. You're not we don't have gay people in our network. Get out of here. You can either stop being who you are and fit in our network, or I never want to see you again. You don't fit in my network. Right? I thought we were an upstanding, civilized, normal member of the network, right? And you just ruin it by sticking your penis in other people's butts. What are you thinking? That's not what we do. Why? It feels good. Well, it's not what we do. So this is the tension. The I wants to know who it is. Right? And the I is not very bright, right? The ego is not very bright, particularly the cult ego. We do these things, we don't even think about why we do them, that's what we do, right? Someone died, you're supposed to say, I'm so sorry. I'm not sorry. I'm busy texting and playing my video game. I'm annoyed at the interruption. But you're supposed to go over there and say you're terribly sorry and you're for their loss. What do you mean that my loss? I just inherited lots of money. I got rid of that horrible aunt I don't like. But you're not supposed to say, hooray, hooray, I've got the inheritance. Got rid of the old bag, always on my case about this and that, hooray. No, you're ruining the network effect, right? Nobody's going to invite you over again. You're ruining the script. Remember, the identity is a pattern, meaning it repeats itself over and over and over again. And how is that going to happen unless you teach your kids the pattern? And if your kids learn the roles, right? So you're supposed to say, yes, it's a tragic loss of a great human being, right? No, I haven't even counted the money yet. No, because I'm a worthy member of the network, right? Oh, I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. It's going to take me. We'll get through it. Where's all this bullshit coming from? We'll get through it, with this and that. Like, complete nonsense. It has nothing to do. This person's feeling desperately sad over a very small thing, but shouldn't. And so they're pretending they're not. This other person is feeling jubilation that finally their dog died just before they could. The dog sitter is so expensive, right? $1,000 a month for a dog sitter? Thank goodness he died just before the vacation. Oh, goodness. I feel so relieved, right? Now let's get on vacation. Everyone's feeling differently, but the mask to maintain cohesion, to maintain the network effect, right? This one's changing this feeling to this feeling. This person is not saying these things they're thinking, but saying these things he's thinking, so that we can appear to be part of a civilized network, right? A cohesive whole. So let's look at a few of the equations around here. So first of all, we all have inner ages, right? There's a part of me that feels 2 years old. There's a part of me that feels 5 years old. There's a part of me that feels 20 years old. Everyone has inner ages. Now, in a psychologically illiterate culture, we may not be aware of them, right? Well, why not? Well, because nobody's aware of them, right? Because we don't talk about it. Why not? Well, we don't. That's part of our cult, right? We just don't talk about this, so we're not aware of it. But, right, if we bother to look, if we bother to become aware, we start noticing we're not the same psychological age in each moment. Like we play with our dog, and suddenly we're 5 years old and playing and this, but we don't talk about that. No, right? Or maybe we don't even play with our dog because that ruins the effect. But the more traumatized we are, particularly in childhood, in a traumatically illiterate culture that does not heal trauma, the more dissociated we are. Right? When we're traumatized in a traumatically illiterate culture, the trauma does not get integrated and healed. So parts dissociate at young ages, and they feel small and they feel terrified. Because trauma reminds you that you need others for help. That's what trauma reminds you of. And if you don't get it, you don't get that, well, then you have a problem. So, right? So the higher the trauma in a traumatically illiterate culture, the higher the level of dissociation of pain and trauma at young ages that do not grow up. They stay stuck because the trauma is not being integrated. Now, in our cult, nobody knows this and we don't get that. Why? Because that's not part of our cult. Our cult is to be traumatically illiterate. Are you traumatically illiterate? Yes, me too. Me too. We're all traumatically illiterate. Have you read Body Keeps the Score? Have you done anything about it? No. I meant to. I was kind of on there. It's working its way in the edges of the cult, but no, I haven't read anything about that. Did you have traumatically literate parents? No. Do you know the definition of PTSD? No. Me neither. Right? Bravo. We're all traumatically ignorant. We're traumatically illiterate. And even if we know that we should do something, it's not the correct politically thing to do. We don't bring it up at a party. We don't talk about it. And we don't practice. And we don't do it. Right? And even if we tried to do it, we have to keep it a secret because we wouldn't want anyone to know that we were deviating, deviants, right? Deviants from the cult by actually becoming competent. Okay, so that's all high. Well, what this means is that we are very vulnerable to re-triggering an inner young age, right? Now, the younger the age, the more helpless we feel. The more helpless we feel, the more attached we are to a parental figure and authority, right? So if at 2 years old, my mother died in a car accident, my father shouted at me and started drinking and threw me on the side because he didn't want to hear me screaming while he was trying to deal with his grief. My uncle said, "Oh, I don't want to have to take care of your fucking child." And I felt absolutely worthless. I had no one's going on. I feel absolutely traumatized. I start screaming and someone says, "Shut the fuck up," and hits me. And I learned to just shut down and dissociate. Okay, well, over time I grow through all this. But what's really there is a totally terrified, traumatized 2-year-old in a traumatically illiterate cult where I'm supposed to have just grown through it because the people around me are idiots, and idiots never know that they're idiots, which is always the problem, right? If people were smart, they would realize they were idiots, right? But then they wouldn't be quite so idiotic. They'd actually have a clue. So it's problematic, right? So we're surrounded by idiots that say, "Oh, you've had a happy childhood, and aren't you lucky? You got a doll and this and that, and this and that. You're lucky your aunt took you in." So then there you are. But now a car accident, you see it on TV, and the part of you thinks, "Oh, my whole life is going to fall apart," because it hasn't been reintegrated. It hasn't been learned from. It hasn't been dealt with. There's all that terror in that body memory. And nobody knows that nobody knows what they're doing about that, right? So it can't be talked about, because in a shame-based culture, if you do anything wrong, you deserve to be punished, right? So nobody wants to admit that nobody knows what they're doing, because then we'd be bad, right? So now we're very vulnerable to being re-triggered. The younger we are psychologically, the more we need the family, the more we need the network. The more we need the family, the more we need the network, the more shame we feel, the more warning bells go off if we're trying to leave the network. Like, we're a poor family. You think you're going to be rich? How dare you? Look at your mother. You can't just go off and be rich. Like, we're a poor family. That's what we've been doing for generations. This is the identity of this family. You can't just go and be rich. You'll feel tremendous shame, right? Tremendous thing. You're starting to deviate from the norm. Because there's a very young part of you that feels like they're going to die if they don't belong, if they're not part of the network. So you try and do an intelligent thing like become educated in an illiterate family. Oh, so-and-so thinks they're so high and mighty and thinks this, oh, you think this. You think you're better than your old man. You think, that whole dynamic, you're deviating. Like, we're a struggling, resentful family that hates rich people. You're becoming a rich person, you fool. What are you doing? Right? That's not what we do. Right? So we go back to this. Now, a healthy, untraumatized person at an older age says, well, I understand it's not your fault that you worked in a mine for 10 generations and this, and that, and the other, but there's actually free college education for people that want to study right now. I know you didn't have that, but I do, and why not, right? And why not enjoy it, right? But to a regressed 2-year-old that's terrified of being abandoned because they can't survive alone, they're going to look at mom and dad and are you going to feel at all guilty or bad that you didn't do better if I do this? Maybe I just won't do it, right? I won't do it, right? Because psychologically, I feel 2 years old. Now, the other thing that happens with trauma is the higher the trauma, the more unstable is the I's pattern. The I has a pattern of thinking, a pattern of feeling, a pattern of doing, a pattern of speaking, a pattern of being, right? This is a pattern, right? You can recognize my voice. You can put it together because you remember the pattern. I have this pitch. I have this pace. I have a gesture pattern, right? These are an identity. You look at that, you say, that's the same person who was talking 5 minutes ago. How? Because there's a pattern. There's a coherent pattern. And I look in the mirror and I see, that's me. How do I know? Because it's a pattern. I was that way yesterday. I'm repeating it, right? I'm repeating the pattern. I could just paint my face red and, dye my nails and start dressing in different clothes and start, I could start making different sounds. I might not recognize myself. Who's that? I've never seen them before. Yeah, it's a different pattern. Right? I could do that. It's one of the reasons actors and actresses, people with an unstable pattern, can shift pattern more easily, but they can also lose themselves, right? The phenomena of an actor losing themselves in a role, right? They develop a new pattern, but then they're holding on to that pattern, right? I'm now this pattern. I'm this character. I don't want to step out of character now. And then who was I before? I lost myself. I lost the old pattern because I'm playing this new pattern, right? And so the best actors can let go of their pattern, but the best actors can also lose themselves. What does that mean? They lost the old pattern. Now, I don't know who I am. I'm this role now, right? And then what is the pattern? Well, if that's a role that's, a fucked up alcoholic that wants to kill himself and is violent and rude, that may be not such a good trade-in, right? I traded in a nice, sweet, pleasing little boy pattern who everyone liked how polite they were, and now I'm this drunk role in this actor, and now I think I'm this, right? Trauma is the phenomena of the bowling ball and the pinball, right? They collide. The small pattern shatters, breaks, bounces off, and the big pattern continues. When the bully and the little boy collide, the bully continues, the little boy breaks. The pinball goes flying, the bowling ball continues its trajectory when they meet. The larger pattern shatters, breaks, overpowers the smaller pattern. And that is a traumatic event. When the I attaches itself to the small pattern and is shattered, it becomes terrified of the unknown, terrified of death, terrified of chaos, and it searches desperately around for a pattern to hang on to. And shame is a trauma. Shame is a violation. To say you don't belong to our group is a traumatic event. You no longer belong to this family is a traumatic event, right? If you're gay in a puritanical, dogmatic cult, when it is discovered that you enjoy affection with other human beings of your same gender, heaven forbid, then you no longer belong. You're looked at with hatred, you're looked at with fear, right? This is such a traumatic event, and it's more so if we're at a younger age and in a dependent relationship. This is such a traumatic event. Who I am is hated by others. I need those other people to feel love and belonging. I need them to feel security of survival. I don't know who I am without being a member of this cult, with this family. And in that dynamic, I have lost my pattern. I used to smile at this person, but I can't smile with the hatred coming back. I lost it. I can no longer maintain my pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in the face of this hostility. I have lost my pattern. I don't know who I am. When this happens traumatically, the ego looks for a new pattern desperately. Its terror of the unknown is higher than its terror of pain. And so it looks to what is the strongest pattern around me that I can identify with. And it finds that the strongest pattern is the shame itself. I didn't make a mistake, I am a mistake. I didn't do something bad, I am bad. I didn't do something that these idiots can't love, I am unlovable. And once the I, shattered in a traumatic event, attaches itself to the shame, I am unlovable, I am unwantable, I am bad, I am flawed, I deserve to be punished. Once the I attaches itself to that, it has a new identity, a shame-based identity. I am flawed, I'm unlovable, I'm an unwanted God doesn't like me, my parents don't like me, the community, I'm a criminal. I am a criminal. It's not that I did something. The speed limit said 55 miles an hour. I drove 65 miles an hour. I broke the law. The law. Well, what's the law? Well, it's there on the sign, right? Well, this other law says 85 miles an hour. Yeah, but this law says 55. This one says 35. This one says 25. I broke the law. I am a lawbreaker. I am a lawbreaker, right? The traumatized ego looks for solid patterns and finds them in the judgments of the cult. I am unworthy, unlovable, a lawbreaker, a murderer. And it is worth noting. We don't say I am a breather, but we breathe all the time. One person kills one person one time in an accident or in a fit of rage, and so they killed, right? And it's called murder in our cult, and so I am a murderer. I am a murderer. Yes, you killed one person one time. Right? Are you a harvester? You've harvested 10,000 beans from the garden. I'm a harvester. That's not a very strong pattern. The things that the ego looks for when it's in a traumatized state, something that's really intense and solid, that's kind of rock bottom, as low as it can go often, right? Because joy is often a little bit ephemeral, and it can be knocked down. But guilt and unworthiness and tightness and fear and horrible, those are very solid structures, right? So the ego likes them because it's wanting to maintain a sense of self before it's trying to feel good. The ego wants to know who it is, right? I feel bad, I'm mad, I'm an angry person. That's a very solid energy, right? You can always remember the event and go back. And so it answers the ego's need for certainty and stability. The I's need to identify with something solid. And so there it is, right? So that's when shame becomes the shame of I, the shame of being. I am. So it's not just, oh, I wore a shirt with hair on it. I am a slovenly, disgusting, terrible, worthless, unforgivable person because I wore a shirt with hair, right? I am a fool. I'm a fool. Look, I could have just looked down and saved myself weeks of humiliation, but I'm a fool, right? So the ego attaches and it becomes part of the identity. And then something nice, and see, the ego doesn't want change. It doesn't want chaos. It doesn't want certainty. So then later on this evening, I take off my shirt, I put on a new shirt. Tomorrow, hairless shirt is gone. But that's not what the ego does. The ego says, oh no, I remember it for weeks, right? You know, I wore that hairy shirt. Oh, back in 1979, I did this. That's who I am. I'm a fool, right? I lost this, I stole that, I did this. Back then, I did that. But I'm not going to let it go, right? I'm still, I did that long ago. I did that. But this is who I am, right? Deep inside, if you really saw, you'd see back in 1979, I did this one thing. The ego is identifying with that pattern. And it's usually something that there's a strong intensity around. And the strongest intensity is trauma. The most intense thing a human being can experience in a lifetime is trauma. So when the ego identifies with it, and shame is a trauma because it is a rejection from the group. We don't want you. You're in need, we're not returning your call. You call, we hang up. I've been rejected. Who I am is unlovable. That is a trauma. And the trauma is higher the younger the psychological age. And the younger the age is younger, the more we have regressed, untreated trauma in a traumatically illiterate culture. So shame and trauma are very closely linked. And shame of being is an identity. It's a pattern the ego is desperately holding on to because it's frightened of chaos, frightened of being out of control, frightened of overwhelm, and frightened of the unknown. I know I'm a bad person. I'm a bad person, and I've been a bad person for a very long time. I know what that feels like. If I let go with that, who am I? A good person? Do good people do that? Well, back in 1979, do good people do that? Do good people do? I'm confused. I'm a bad person. I'm a bad person, right? And so the ego hangs on to something solid, the shame of being. So the shame of being is a trauma. The shame of being is an identity. An identity of shame occurs after a trauma of shame, right? So there is a link between, and trauma occurs when we're in a dependent relationship with a network, when we don't have a backup plan. We're 2 years old, we need mother's milk, right? And she shouts at us, we don't have a backup plan, right? If we have 3 or 4 aunties around loving us at the same time, then it won't be as traumatic. But if we made a noise and now we're unlovable to mom and she's shouting because she lost a job because we screamed in the job interview and the guy said, you obviously have kids, we can't give you a job. And now mom doesn't know how to survive as a single parent. She fucking hates us. How am I going to take care of you, you dumb fuck? You screamed right when I'm trying to get a fucking job interview because your fucked up dad did this. What'd I do? I'm bad, right? I'm bad. That's who I am, I'm bad, right? So now I have a stolid identity. I'm bad. But then I have to do things that are bad to be consistent with my new identity. Because it can't be a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being if I'm not doing it regularly. right? I can't be bad from one event back when I was 2. I have to do some bad things to kind of keep up the image, right? Keep the identity stable, right? So I start to do something great, but then I get confused, like, who am I? And then I have to do something bad again, right? And then okay, that now I know who I am. Thank goodness, I'm bad. So psychological age, traumatic illiteracy, and abuse of the giants of the little one. The ego desperately looking for something solid. And forming an identity based on shame-based behavior as defined by the cult, right? Because in healthy, flexible groups with low cult-like elements, when you fall into one thing, from time to time, etc., the whole circle owns it, right? In a healthy circle, you don't scapegoat an individual. In a healthy circle, you own the energy flow. You can say, a lot of the anger and hate is concentrating in this one individual. They've lost their parent, nobody's taking care of them, they're not getting an education, they're getting constant messages, the kids are all teasing them. All the hate of our whole cult is going towards this one person. Naturally, they're going to have to express that in some way that is politically incorrect. So let's do something about it. Let's take it back. Let's apologize. Let's stand up for them. Let's include them. Well, then the probability field of violence and stuff collapses. But no, we're not going to do that. We're going to scapegoat the kid. We all know what's happening, right? And then surprise, surprise, they identified with being unlovable and shame, and now they're doing unlovable things to be consistent with the identity, right? And surprise, surprise, right? How could they do that, right? How could an entire cult collude to be this unconscious and dump it all on a teenager, right? Happens all the time, right? Fucked up, sociopathic, psychologically. How could we be this psychologically illiterate? It's easy. Let's just not study the psyche in school. Let's shame anyone who brings up the obvious, right? Let's watch TV and turn the channel when anyone talks about anything emotional. It's easy to be psychologically illiterate. Cult behavior, a cult identity of being psychologically illiterate. We just avoid all psychological literacy. There's a few books here and there. Let's not read them. Let's not read them. So, right? So once the I is attached to the shame-based identity, the shame-based pattern of I am ugly, I am unwanted, I am unlovable, it looks for reasons to strengthen its identity because the ego is safest if it knows who it is and is in control. The ego does not feel safe in bliss and love if it doesn't understand it. The ego feels very safe in shame and horror if that's what it's defining itself as. I know that. That's who I am, right? The ego is very content. The ego is very unhappy with chaos and confusion and not knowing who it is. Someone loves an unlovable ego, they hate it. They'll start attacking, get away from me, you're ruining my identity. Right? I'm an unlovable person, don't you understand? Right? I'm an unlovable person. You're ruining it. What are you doing? How am I going to make sense of myself if you are the one person who loves me? Get away. I wasn't loved by my mother. I wasn't loved by my teacher. My older brothers beat me up. I'm an unlovable person, and you are not going to ruin it. Get the fuck out. I feel confused. I'm unlovable here, and it's too confusing in a psychologically illiterate culture. So I'm going to attack you. How dare you ruin my plan, right? Nobody understands me. What, you're understanding me? You're going to be the one to ruin my identity? Get away. So this is the crisis. This is the crisis of shame. It's the crisis of identity. It's the crisis of psychological literacy. It's the crisis of a weak, insecure ego in a rapidly changing world in a chaotic pattern. Good luck.